Welcome to B Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find the flow in life and on the river. I'm Brad Burton. Join me as I talk to paddlers, athletes, and adventurers who are all seeking the flow. B Flow Sessions is supported by the brands that keep us moving downstream. Dagger Kayaks, wherever there's water. Sawyer Paddles, crafted in Oregon and whitewater proven. And Stohlquist PFDs, conquering wild waters since 1977. Support the companies that support the flow. Welcome to episode 2 of B Flow Sessions, and I'm super excited to have our guest today, one of the all-time greats in whitewater kayaking. He was a 1992 Olympian in slalom kayaking, several-time medalist in freestyle kayaking. For a long time, had the waterfall world record, and most importantly for all of us kayakers, is he was just an innovator in kayak design. So I'm pleased to be joined today by the one and only Corran Addison. Corran, thanks for being on B Flow Sessions.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, Corran, tell us, about finding the flow for the first time. How'd you get your start in kayaking, and the intro to being in the flow?
Um, well, I was very young. I was about 5 years old, and my father, the way he tells the story is he saw the film Deliverance and wanted to learn to canoe, to whitewater canoe. Now, that's its own pathological inquisition right there. You see Deliverance and that makes you want to go canoeing. But anyway, so he saw that, wanted to go canoeing, and in South Africa, where I was growing up during the apartheid regime, South Africa was cut off from the rest of the world. So we didn't have access to anything. And they couldn't find any canoes or canoe molds. But one of the universities had this kayak mold lying around from the early 1970s. It was the early, it was the mid 1970s, but it was, you know, it must have been like a 72, 73. I think it was a Prion High or a Mandesta or something like that. And they got their hands on this mold and made him and a couple of his students, because he was a lecturer at the university, and a couple of his students in the basement of the university with fiberglass fingers and resin sticking up the entire university with polyester resin, built these boats in the basement. And I remember standing there watching this. I was this little kid and I was watching them build these boats and then watching them prepare for everything. And I'm just being very intrigued by the expedition that they were going on. And it wasn't really kayaking. It was it was exploration. It was Livingstone and Stanley, right? Or Lewis and Clark for you, right?
Sure.
It was it was that sort of thing that was going on. And I very much wanted to be a part of it. And that first trip they did was a failure, an absolute failure. I mean, my mom ran shuttle, so dropped them off at the put in. They're supposed to do a 2-day trip with one overnight with all their stuff in the boats. None of them knew the first thing about whitewater or kayaks or anything at all. And they put on the section of class 2-3 whitewater on the Saturday morning. And the idea is that they were going to meet us however many kilometers down the road on the Sunday evening.
And what river was this?
This was the Orange River, the Allowal North section of Orange River on the border of the Orange Free State and what was then Natal.
Okay.
And they, so we were just hanging out with my mom and playing, my 2 youngest brothers and I, and Sunday afternoon comes and there's no sign of them, and Sunday evening comes and there's no sign of them, and Sunday night comes and there's no sign of them, and hours after dark on Sunday nights, there's this rustling and ruffling, and, down at the waterline, and swearing, and these 3 very miserable, sunburned, absolutely destroyed Neanderthals amble out of the muddy river up the bank, cursing and swearing with what looked to be 1.5 kayaks. And almost none of their stuff, and left it on the side of the river. Everybody climbed in the car and we drove away, and they swore that they would never go back. They were never going to do it again. And that was my
that
introduction.
experience was like, yeah, I want to do this.
Yeah, so that was my introduction to paddling. Is this was terrible. This sucked. We almost died 15 times. We're never going back. Oh, cool. I want to do that.
Yeah,
Um,
very little of kayaking is what we see on YouTube right now. Like the glory of the big surf or the big waterfall or the perfect rapid. There's a lot of times when things don't go very well.
yeah, and for a first experience, it's not, it's not very motivating to do it again. But, a few months went by and they were talking about trying it again and taking what they had learned and improving on the equipment that they built. We didn't have seats. They didn't have spray skirts. They didn't have footrests. They might have had some kind of grab handle in the boat, but I don't even remember if they had that. I think
Hmm.
they had like sailing life jackets that's got like the two front panels with the straps around the back, and
Yeah,
maybe they had construction helmets on, like without even this, just like just sitting on, so it was, and then no protection from the sun. I think they had flip flops on, which lasted the first swim. All their dry stuff in garbage bags, which were immediately perforated by the fiberglass inside the boat. So everything they had was sodden. The boats, they didn't, it was an absolute disaster, right? But they were going to learn from this and go again. They built new boats um, and then they went down to the local lake, Midmar Dam, and I managed to convince my dad to let me try it as well. And I started paddling around with them in the dam. And I think they went on another trip before I was then brought on board. So by the time I did a trip with them, my dad built a double. So he basically built out of plywood, came up with a way, or designed a boat out of plywood, if I remember correctly, and then made a mold off it. And all this is from a book. There was some
right.
book that they had in the library of the university from the mid '60s, right at the advent of fiberglass. And they're learning all this from the book. They're learning how to build a boat, how to design a boat, and build a boat from a book that was all just text with a couple of black and white, grainy photos in it, like maybe a
Right.
half dozen photos in the whole book, and some bad sketches. And you know, they didn't know about eddies. They didn't know what a hole or a wave was. They didn't know about leaning downstream. They didn't know about leaning
Right.
upstream. They didn't know that trees were strainers. They didn't know any of this stuff. Like none of it. And it was just learn as you go, right? And I was
Unbelievable.
there for it. Um,
Yeah.
and it was the adventure is what
Hmm.
I fell in love with. It wasn't so much the paddling; it was the adventure. And
Yeah.
all of these trips were multi-day, out in the deserts, in the Kalahari Desert, or on the high-felt plains. Um, and so I fell in love with the expedition nature of
Hmm.
kayaking long before I fell in love with kayaking itself. That came much later. That came in the '80s.
Okay.
Um,
And so this was mid 70s, early 70s.
Mid '70s. So I'm
Okay.
born in '69. So yeah, I was
Okay.
5 when I first got on a boat on the lake. I think I was 6 the first time I went on a small river trip. It was maybe just an afternoon trip with my dad on probably the Fish River in the Cape Province, or what was then the Cape Province. Um, and then I might have been 7 the first time we did one of these 12-day expeditions out into the Kalahari Desert, on the Orange River, sort of where right before it meets the Atlantic Ocean, where Namibia and South Africa meet, in
Hmm.
that corner, and it goes through the Kalahari and the Namib deserts. And there's this section that they run, or we used to run down there, sort of 10, 12 days in the middle of nowhere, everything in the boats. It was different.
Yeah. So then, I mean, when did you first start like getting, proficient in whitewater kayaking, realizing that you had a natural ability and looking at come to the States or designing kayaks? How did all that transpire?
In about 1982, so I had just entered high school. I think I was a junior in high school. Um, my dad did a trip, and so by about 1981 or 82, he had realized that people wanted to go paddling. They wanted to go on these river trips. I mean, and so there was no such thing in South Africa like commercial rafting and kayak schools, and like none of this existed, right?
Sure.
We were 20 years behind the rest of the world.
Hmm.
And, I mean, we had closet dowels with plywood for paddles. Like I said, my mom invented the spray skirt, or thought she did,
Right.
in the late 70s with using tablecloths, plastic tablecloths. And they would drape the tablecloth over the cockpit and tie it on with a rope. I mean, you can imagine the panic of trying to get out of a boat with, a knot in a rope holding your
Right.
skirt on. Eventually they came up with slip knots, and that then eventually became bicycle tubes, right? So they draped the spray skirt over the cockpit, and then you put a bicycle tube around the cockpit, and that held it on with like a pull cord. But so this was a process, and each one of
Right.
those steps was a life and death experience that led to the next innovation, right? Um,
I
but in
mean,
19, huh?
if if I could jump in real quick right there, that I mean, going through all that and seeing that as a little kid, that had to at least excuse me, subconsciously inspire a lot of the just the mindset of always trying to design the next best thing, whether it's a kayak or a paddle or snowboard bindings or whatever. I mean, that had to plant quite a seed in you.
I think it's more than just a seed. For me, there's never been a difference between kayaking and equipment development. They've always been
Hmm.
the same thing. So most paddlers get into paddling and they kayak for however long and they become proficient. And then one day they decide that, oh, you know what, I want to design a new boat, or I don't like this piece of equipment that I have. I think a life jacket could be better, and they go about the process of learning how to design something that they feel is missing, that needs to be
Hmm.
done. Whereas for me, there was never any distinction between kayak design or equipment design and use of that equipment. They've always been the same thing, and one is not possible without the other. Like, I don't think about kayak design and kayaking. It's the same thing,
Right.
right? It's like thinking about a banana and a banana skin. It's bananas come in a banana skin, you
Right.
know. So so absolutely, it's which so from before I ever went kayaking, I was involved with the development of kayaking equipment.
Hmm.
We had to do that before we could paddle, right? It wasn't the other way around. So it's pretty unique in that sense. So somewhere around the early 80s, I think it was 81 or 82, my dad realizes that people would actually give him money to take them on these trips. And, so he's now making fiberglass boats. And these are all downriver race boats, right? We're learning to
Right.
kayak in 5 meter long, super skinny DR boats
Right.
that don't turn and go fast, and they're made out of fiberglass and break. And if so I mean, you look back at it and it's a head scratcher.
Right.
Um, and um, he met the 1981 world silver medalist, downriver silver medalist, Jerome Truran, who was a South African who'd been living in Europe and had competed for the British team, got a silver medal in 81, and had moved back to South Africa. And somehow my dad had met Jerome and invited him to go on this trip into the Kalahari on the Orange River. And there was a gorge on that river that they thought had never been run at the time, this that they portaged around. And it was this epic portage around this very dangerous canyon. And Jerome had heard about this canyon and he was motivated to go because he wanted to do it. And he shows up with this short, wide, highly rocketed, fat boat made out of plastic.
Wow.
So it was a
That'd blow your mind.
perception. It was a perception quest. I wasn't there. My
Okay.
dad was there. It was a
Yeah.
perception quest. Now, by today's standards, a quest is a long, pointy, low rockered boat. But for
Right.
us, it was short and fat and rockered and plastic. Right? You could beat it and nothing would happen
Yeah.
to it. And he does this trip with my dad, and he's surfing these waves, and he's doing pop-ups and enders in these holes, and then he runs this canyon, and my dad comes back and goes, "Corran, you're not going to believe what I just saw. Like and it was beyond it was imagine someone who's never seen a bicycle in their life sees an airplane.
Right.
You know, it was this mind-blowing moment for him, and he's raving about this, and you've got to meet him, you've got to meet him. He lives up the road. let's go meet him. Let's see if he wants to go paddling. And Jerome is like, okay, the first thing we got to do is we got to change your boats. And his dad owned what was a kayak shop. So we didn't know this before, but there was actually a pretty developed kayaking club scene for racing. So they have these 7 meter, 8 meter long sprint boats that they race down class 2, 3 whitewater rivers in. I mean, it's just another level of what, you
Right.
know. Um, and there's thousands of these people who
Wow.
have these sprint boats and these marathon boats racing down these rivers. And so his dad had a store and he sold this equipment to these people. And none of them know how to roll. None of them knew anything any more than we did. But they did it on a regular basis, you know. And they were doing these day trips and things like that. So this was all new for us, right? And so Jerome tells me about this discipline called slalom. And he goes, we need to get you a slalom boat. Because there were no plastic boats in the country other than his. And he gets me this slalom boat from the mid 70s that was still pretty high volume through his dad. And we go down to the local river where there were a couple of waves. I didn't know how to roll. You know, I didn't know anything, you know, how to do anything, right? I had the most
This is
fundamental.
and this is still like early mid '80s.
This is 82. Yeah, this is 82. You know, so I'm 12 years old or something. And so we go down to this river, and I witnessed this guy surfing waves, doing pop-ups, back surfing the wave. You know, the boats didn't spin back then, you know, but he's doing all
Sure.
this stuff. And my mind was absolutely blown. Absolutely. And so he taught me to roll, like right there, you know, that day, taught me to roll in the eddy. And then I went out and started surfing these waves over the next couple of weeks with him. And then somehow my dad had this opportunity to buy 2 Mirages. There was somebody who was going to bring in a few Mirages from the UK. And my dad ordered 2, one for him and one for me. And these boats show up 6 months later. And we open the container and we're just confused because these boats were completely useless. They were the most ridiculous things you've ever seen. They were so short and they had so much rocker and the decks were high and they were the most absurd, useless kayaks you could ever possibly imagine, called the Dancer.
Yeah. This is my first boat.
But that's how we viewed them. Like,
Sure.
what? Like, what are you supposed to do with this ridiculous? That's not what we ordered. So we call Contact Perception UK, and they're like, "Oh well, the Dancer had just come out, and we thought for sure there's no way you're going to want the Mirage, which is the older boat that's longer, and so we sent you those." And we're like, "But we do these 12-day expeditions through the desert. We need the length, we need the speed." But it forced us to change how we paddle.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, instead of doing 12-day trips, we're doing 3-day trips.
Hmm.
And we're focusing on surfing waves and running harder rapids. And it was this very steep uphill climb from that moment forward when, you know, it was a game changer. The Dancer was an absolute game changer for us. And then we brought some more in, or Jerome's dad, I think, brought some in, and then my dad got some for his kayak company that he had then started called the Rivermen. So it was now official, and he was advertising this thing, and we were every weekend he would pull me out of school on Thursday afternoon, and I would miss Fridays, and we would drive up to the river on Thursday nights, and I was the safety boater and chief instructor, and you know, there's this 14-year-old who's the chief instructor and safety boater on these trips, you know. And we would paddle Friday, Saturday, Sunday, everybody pile back into the vehicles, drive out of the Zululand, you know, valleys on Sunday night, get back home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and be up for school at 7 a.m. You know, with a note explaining why I wasn't at school on Friday
Right.
every weekend. You know, um, and so it really, and you know, and my skill set grew rapidly. You know, and then
Sure.
every we lived at the beach, and so every afternoon after school, I was down at the beach surfing waves in the Dancer, and then quickly progressed to wave skis out in the ocean. And then that set off a light bulb because the wave skis have surfboard holes on them, right? It's flat bottoms.
Hmm.
And so that that triggered a light bulb. So I think it was 87 I started working on my first design that had a planing hole on it.
Okay.
So it was a long time between when I started working on the idea and when the Fury finally came out in '96. It was
Okay.
almost a decade. It was almost a decade.
Yeah, and that's something, I've heard you on other podcasts and, talking with folks, EJ or Shane, whoever it is, right? And looking at boat designs, do you think that with boat design, it's boats are designed by what people want to do, or do you think people want to do what the boat designs are? Does that make sense? Like it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing.
Makes perfect sense, and the answer is both.
Yeah.
So you will paddle in a way that is dictated to you by both the rivers that you have and the equipment
Hmm.
that you use. All right.
Right.
So if all the rivers around you are creeks, then you are naturally going to become a creek paddler, and it's very unlikely that you're going to become a big freestyle paddler.
Right.
Likewise, if you live in a place that's all big waves and there's no creeks around you, it's very unlikely that you're going to become, at least in the early days,
Sure.
right? You might branch out and
Start
travel
traveling.
through,
Right.
to do those things. Um, but then, for example, if where you live is all waves, and the boat that you happen to buy is a full slice, a 7.5 foot full slice, that's how you're going to paddle.
Hmm.
But if the first boat that you buy is a sub 6 foot freestyle boat, then that's how you're going to paddle. And you're going to develop the
Sure.
skill sets around the boats and probably enjoy the paddling style that your boat encourages. So if you're trying to do a whole bunch of eddy line tricks and you own a Rockstar, you're not going to be that good at it and you're not going to love it that much.
But you can loop really easy.
Right.
Mm.
But you loop real easy. And so that's rewarding. And so you're going to fall in love with the loops and that's what you're going to go do.
Yep.
Whereas your mate Charlie, who got a full slice, he wants to go hang out on the eddy lines and he has no interest in going into the hole where he's smashing the end of his boat and just falls on his face because it's a full. So it's both, right? But then you
Yeah.
also have people who develop a certain skill set, or they might be in a loopy boat and they see their buddy in a slicey boat and they get in it and they go, "Ooh, I really like this," right?
Right.
I want to go do that. Now, for me, it's a little bit different because it's more based on a vision. I will, for example, um, let's say the blunts, okay, boats
Mhm.
that do blunts well. All right, so I design a boat that flat spins on waves. And I'm starting to flat spin and I'm starting to carve around the wave and I'll do some carves and then I'll stop and I'll flat spin and then I'll do some carves and I'll stop and I'll flat spin. And one day I go, oh, I wonder if I could do if I could do a flat spin mid carve.
Mhm.
And so I make a carve, and as I make the carve and I start going right, I flat spin on my way across the wave and I get the other side and I make a carve. And you start doing that sooner and sooner and sooner. And one day you start that flat spin and you're all the way, you've just started the turn, you're all the way at the top of the wave. And as you start the flat spin, the bow of the boat just touches the water and it whips it underneath you.
Right.
And you go, oh,
That's cool.
huh. Okay, now you're trying to do it again. You're trying to do it again. And then you realize that the equipment isn't letting you do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
Okay, so what do I need to do? How can I take this boat that I have that's doing the things that I like, and what do I need to do to this boat to make it do that thing that I want to learn to do? Right. And
Yeah.
it was the same thing, for example, with like blunts, right? Air blunts, right? So once I
Yeah.
started, the boats were long, and I started being able to air blunt the boats because I would go firing across the wave and I'd hit the curler on the side of the wave and I'd hit that and use it as a ramp, right?
Mhm.
And it would launch me into the air, and then I would throw this big blunt. But not a lot of waves have those or have them
Sure.
big enough to launch an 8 foot boat. Okay, if waves don't have ramps, is there a way that I could make the boat create a ramp
Right.
through the boat digging a hole in the water? Well, what would I need to do to the boat in order to do that? Well, I would need to shorten it up. If I shorten the boat up so that I hit its maximum speed earlier and I have more control over pitch, then I can accelerate the boat and I can lean back or use another technique to get the nose up that then creates this break that creates a high pressure area that I can then pop out of.
Right.
And I do the 007.
Okay.
Right? Which was followed very quickly by the disco. So, so that's kind of, for me, that's how design and techniques evolve, right? And then so you're doing these things in the disco, and then you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and one day you're vertical, and you're going, ah, I wonder if I could put a vertical axis spin on that blunt. And now you're popping and you're trying to put a vertical axis spin, and all of a sudden the air blunt becomes a Pan Am.
Right.
Right? Because
Yeah.
you're trying to do, and the Pan Am isn't really what I was envisioning. I had something else in mind, but the Pan Am is what I got trying to do that, right?
Right.
Um, and it's like, oh, so what can I? Okay, so this Pan Am is really cool, but now I feel like I'm not getting the projection that I need to really make that work. So I need to go back to getting some length and some speed. But how can I get when I get that length and that speed? Now I'm going to lose that bounce. So instead of bouncing flat, maybe now what I need to be doing is I need to be bouncing rail to rail.
Right.
Maybe that's the way of doing it. So what do I need to do to the boat? How do I shape the outline and the rocker and the sidewall of the boat? And it's all and back then it wasn't like we were doing it on CAD file and we could do computer simulation.
Right.
You were
Yeah.
hand shaping fiberglass and Bondo, and each prototype was a laborious process.
Sure.
And sometimes you could take an existing mold and you could cut the mold a bit, or you could tweak the boat as you were seaming it out, or you could chop it and add rocker and reduce rocker. And, you didn't have to do a new plug every time, but it was still a limiting process, or you could cut the ends off it to reduce volume, or, there were things that you could do, but it wasn't like now where you can do 30 prototypes on computer in a week,
Right.
and test them all on a computer to see whether, before you ever make a solid boat. Like, before you ever make a boat, you've got the first 5 generations of what would be hard shell generations out of the way, before you
Get
even
it done on the
start.
computer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I told you, before we started recording, I've left the sport for 20 years, but through, social media, YouTube and stuff, I've stayed connected to the sport, social media and things like that. Watching an evolution from when I started, like paddling seriously in 97. I was at an RPM, stayed paddling dagger boats all through the mid 2000s, but watching all the other designs. So you go through the late 90s, you start this, the full slice really, first comes about with the triple X, the Vengeance. And forgive me, but I don't remember all the evolutions of the Riot designs and when they came, but you get where I'm going. And then everything got spuddy, the G-Force, the Disco, and everything was spud boat. Then it almost went, everybody was in creek boats. You show up to the Nantahala or the Ocoee, and everybody's in a creek boat, even though in full face helmets. And then half slices come about, and now it seems like kayaking kind of started growing again in the mid 2000 teens with half slices, and now you have full slices coming back. What's your perception of how those different evolutions occurred and why? And did I have is my um, witnessing of that, and retelling of that correct?
Well, fashion is a strange animal. Um, People want to do what other people do,
Okay.
right? Um, Even if it's not really applicable to them. Like, why would you paddle the Nantahala or the Ocoee in a creek boat, other than the fact that all the footage being put out that you're seeing is people in creek boats, and you want to be like them, so you go get a
Okay.
creek boat, right? It doesn't make any sense. But if in the late '90s you couldn't give away a creek boat,
Right.
like people were creaking in their play boats. I mean, you couldn't
Yeah.
give them away.
Yeah. I have a
By
picture of me
the
on the Cascades in a medieval.
Right. Okay. By the mid to late 2000s, you couldn't give away a freestyle boat.
Right.
So things. go through, fashion comes and goes, right?
Okay.
Within the freestyle, the boat started getting slicier. So the Scorpion that I did as Savage was the first. Well, that's actually not true. I was going to say it's the first really radical, super slicey boat. But in
Mm-hmm.
fact, Piranha came out with the stunt bat in '89.
Mm-hmm.
That other than squirt boats, which
Right.
Jesse Whittemore and Jim Snyder and those guys need, Roger Zabel, and they've got to have get credit for those, and those definitely, the
Sure.
squirt boats definitely influenced what we were doing, right? But we were
100%.
doing freestyle in creek boats, right? So, like, 91, I won the Akoi Rodeo in a Corsica S,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
Well,
were doing,
93 at the Worlds, like people were in free falls, right? Like that was one of the
well, no, Team
or free fall
Dagger, some of
LT.
the Team Dagger people were in free falls, but no, Dagger came out with the transition, but I think they only had three of them. So it was just Scott Shipley, EJ, and I don't know who the third, maybe Mark Lyle or somebody
Yes, or Mark Lau, yeah.
had transitions, right? And everybody else was in cut down free falls. They were cutting it well in the free falls, right? But for
Okay.
example, I had the Hurricane, which was linking ends,
Mm-hmm.
at the 93 Worlds, right? We were linking 3-4 ends in Hellhole, compared to 92 when we were all in Corsica S's,
Right.
right? So it was a big jump. 94, the Scorpion was the same basic concept of the Hurricane, but way more radical. Like the ends of the Scorpion were tiny compared to the center volume of the boat.
Right.
So unlike a squirt boat where the whole boat is small so that you can sink it, we didn't want to sink. We wanted to sit on top of the water, but then we wanted to we wanted to be able to slice the ends through like a squirt boat, but stay floaty on top, right?
Right. Yep.
And so the Scorpion was the most radical of those kinds of designs. But at the time I was living in the Southeast and they don't have a lot of water. Everything is shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And, our solution was to put stainless steel end caps on the end of the Scorpion because they were so thin and they were so long that they were just smashing the bottom of rivers all the time. And I was like, it makes sense to make a really short boat that fits into all these holes. And that's where the Fury
Okay.
started. The Fury, original concept of the Fury was the same sort of shape as the Scorpion, but really short.
Right.
And in fact, it was almost, I took a Scorpion and cut the ends off it, basically, not quite, but almost. And the idea was to fit into smaller features, right? And so even though it took a while for short spuddy boats to become a thing, because the boats were getting slicier and slicier,
Mm-hmm.
it's, it's always a process. If you do too much too fast, people won't get on board.
Yep.
All right. You've got to ease them into stuff, right? So the boats went from 10 feet to 9 feet to 7.5 feet to 7.2, which was the 007, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the first Fury prototype was 6.8 in 95. The Disco didn't come out, or the 007 didn't come out, not 95, in 90, 95, yeah. The Disco didn't come out until 99, actually on the market in 2000, but we had them at the 99 Worlds.
Okay.
The 007 was 98, but we had the Fury in 95. The
Right.
short stubby Fury, not what it eventually ended up being. It went up in length and it became a flat hull and it became slicey. But the original Fury looked a lot more like the Disco without a planing hole. It had a bit of a planing hole in the back of the boat because I'd gone back to experimenting with that already by then, right? But it wasn't planing in the front; it was only planing in the back. But the second version of the Fury was 7.2 and had a planing hole on it. Not the final version of the planing hole, but it definitely had a planing hole, and on the right wave I could spin it and things like that.
Sure.
So, and the 007 did really well. The 007 sold very, very well because all of a sudden everybody who lived places that didn't have water the entire Southeast, the entire Pacific
Hmm.
Northwest. In fact, most of the U.S.
Right.
Right. Here was a boat that fit in the spots,
Yeah.
and we sold thousands of those things of the 007.
Right.
Um, and so that was an example of a boat where people gravitated towards it because it made accessible to your average person in their average spot what the pros were doing in the exceptional spots in the longer boats. You know, I can throw around a 10-foot boat in Lachines,
Right.
but if you live on the Ocoee, you can't, or
No.
not like that.
Right.
But if you have a 007, you kind of
Hmm.
can, right? So it made that stuff accessible. And that's why there was this mass gravitation very quickly. So I did the 007, but that was also at the time period where everybody was doing slicey, right? So I did the glide, then I did I did the 007 and the glide at the same time, actually, but the 007 came out first.
Okay.
And then the glide came out right behind it, which was longer again, right? The glide was 8.2
Hmm.
and the slice were 8.2
But the
as
glide
opposed
was
to seven.
amazing on a wave.
It was amazing on a wave, and people saw all the footage of what we
Yeah.
were doing on the Lachines, and they went out and bought them by the thousands. You know, but most people couldn't really do in that boat what we were doing because they didn't have the spots for it, right?
Right.
So then we did then I did the disco, and the
Yeah.
disco was basically slightly shorter than the 007. It was 6.6 instead of 7.2, but it was a glide haul on a short boat, and that just blew the doors open for everybody, right? And then
Yeah.
like the following
Game
year, I
changer.
think the Vertigo came out, and I don't know what it was, but there was some boats like that came out,
Yeah.
right? And and then after that, like you had like the Kingpin and the Easy,
Hmm.
and so these boats were all like a year later, right? Capitalizing
Right.
on what was obviously the future of freestyle paddling for most people.
Yeah. I think the
Um,
G-Force maybe was the Dagger boat that kind of came out right after the Disco. Kind of the
yeah, that's
first
right. The
such
G-force.
stubby.
That's right. It was the G-force. Yeah, yeah. And I disagreed with that shape because they made the ends low volume on a short boat, and I was of the opinion that because the boat was short, you didn't need the low volume ends.
Hmm.
You didn't need to make it slicey, where they were still stuck in this sliced boat mentality, but we're going to just make it shorter, right? So it was still going deep and it was still hitting rocks, where the Disco, even though it was the same length or even maybe slightly longer, could play in places that the G-force couldn't play, and was more attentive, and it would stay in the holes, and it wouldn't go as deep, and so you wouldn't hit as much, um and then things kind of got between the two, where boats would end up a little bit more slicey than the Disco, like we did the Air,
Hmm.
but a little bit less slicey than the G-force. And I mean, designs vary and it goes up and down, and it depends on what the vision of the designer is and where they paddle and what
Right.
they do. My testing ground is a giant trampoline. My boats are going to reflect that.
Right.
You know, um, so but then what happened was people started um, they they started realizing that it was difficult to do. Like, it's hard for somebody to link up 10 ends in a row in a hole, but any punter can link up 10 ends on an eddy line.
Hmm. Right.
And the short boats are not vertically stable, so they
Right.
started getting long again,
Okay.
right? And it wasn't so that you could go out and do cool whitewater stuff. It's just all of a sudden everybody abandoned whitewater and nobody was at the play spots anymore, and everybody was hanging out at the eddy lines at the bottom of the rapids.
Hmm.
And I remember play spots that had a 15-minute waiting time being vacant. There was
So I was
nobody
just at
there.
Hellhole. I was just at Hellhole this weekend, and way less people there than 20 years ago. And one thing I noticed, I was talking to a friend of mine who were paddling. Certainly, the people you see, the Dane Jacksons and the Anyuls and people like that you see on YouTube, they've taken the sport to a whole nother level, right? But the average, for me, a Southeast guy, the average paddler on the Koei or the Nantahala is not any better than the average paddler was 20 years ago. Do you think that's fair?
I think they're not as good.
Yeah. Okay. I was trying to be nice.
I think they're not as good as they were 20 years ago because they're in equipment that doesn't make you learn skill sets.
Hmm.
Anybody can paddle down the Ocoee in a half slice and do a few squirts here and there and make it through the rapids,
Right.
right? To paddle the Ocoee in a triple X or a dominatrix
Yeah.
or a ultrafuge
Yeah.
required a skill set that is no longer required.
Hmm.
Now, people got frustrated in those boats and they got beat up in those boats. And when kiteboarding showed up with four-line kites, there was a mass and mountain bikes with full suspension and all these other sports that were all of a sudden relatively easy to be relatively proficient in.
Hmm.
There was and other factors, economic, socioeconomic factors, and people went off and had families, and all kinds of things happened
Sure.
all at the same time. Right? You
Right.
had the full suspension mountain bikes, you had trails opening up, you had the full line kite coming along. People now hit their early 30s that had been, paddlers all through the 90s, into the beginning of the 2000s. Now in their 30s, they're going off and had families. You have the economic crash in 2008. So you have all these things happen at over about a 5-6 year period, and there was a mass exodus from the sport. I mean, the sport was selling what, 50,000 whitewater units a year in 2002, 2003. By 2008, the entire industry combined was selling what, maybe 5,000.
Really. But now there's kind of a resurgence
Maybe.
now, right? Though. I mean, obviously had a boom
It's
around
not like it
COVID.
was in 2004. It's
Of
not
course not.
that.
No. No.
But yeah, no, there's been a steady, from about 2015, there's been a steady increase. Um, you know, so some guy who's in a half slice can futz his way down the Ocoee with a relatively low skill set. Now you've got the guys who are in, the little short freestyle boats, and they have to learn some skills, you
Right.
know.
But even just
But
watching
even
the
those,
the the guys at Hellhole, like everybody's there's no one cartwheeling. There's no everybody's the spins are the only thing, and I'm talking the average person. Where in 2002, the average person at the Cody was sponsored,
well, they were getting pro
and
form
going
or something like that.
well, right. But you know
Yeah,
what I mean. Like they were very proficient at freestyle, and we were looping out of the top wave and multiple cartwheels and blunting both shoulders. And there was, like I said, there was 10 or 15 people this weekend, and there was one guy who threw a blunt in Hellhole, and everybody else was
right.
just flat spinning.
Yeah, and well, because it's hard to blunt a rock star. I'm not picking on the rock star, but that kind of
No,
boat.
yeah,
It's hard. It
right,
doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't move. It
right.
just sits on the ramp, right? So it's hard to get to the shoulders. So
Hmm.
those boats are made to sit in the middle and throw, you know, loopity
Loop,
flippity things.
right.
That's what they do. And they're
Yeah,
excellent at it. You
yeah,
sit in one spot and you go loopity flippity, loopity flippity, loopity flippity, and you run up 1,500 points in 45 seconds.
right,
Perfect. But if you're not able to do the loopity flippity, they don't do anything
right.
other than flat spin. They do
Exactly.
nothing,
Yeah,
right? Your average Ocoee paddler would be way better off in a Mixed Master or a Nova or a Dominatrix or my new
sure.
Trickster or, you know, way better off in that kind of boat
Yeah.
than a freestyle boat. But
Well, that's
kayaking
why a
is
lot of the
fashion.
companies aren't making them anymore, right? I mean, Jackson and Piranha are really the only two that are making ICF boats anymore, right? Like Dagger doesn't have one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So you've got the Helicotron and you've got the Rockstar. Yeah, but I mean, but it's not like you can't get them. They're
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And well, you've got EXO. But they're in Europe and Spade. Who've got a freestyle boat, but it's in Europe, right? So you're not seeing it down here. Um, but yeah, so I would say the skill set is less because half the people in the eddy, at Hellhole are in a half slice, and all it's going to do is front surf. And most
Hmm.
of the half slices are not that great on a wave. They're not fantastic wave boats. So in a spot like Hellhole that you've got to have a Midas touch, they're
Yeah.
hard to flat spin.
Yeah.
It's not like, for example, the particle accelerator, which is like loose as a goose, right?
Hmm.
Most of them are a little bit more creek focused. So
Yes.
if you want to go to the Teleco, then your Ripper, or your
The
what's the larger boat,
rewind or
the
the
wheel, something wheel, or the
yeah,
rewind,
hot
or
whip.
hot whip. Um, those are going to be good boats because they've got more creaky type rocker. They've got
Mhm.
big bow volume on them, and but you can still squirt them around. You can turn them on the back of the boat, so you can tap into the currents. And they're going to excel. But if you're on the Yokoi, they're not going to spin on Grumpy's Wave. They're not going
Right,
to spin at Double Trouble. They're not going to spin at Hellhole, unless
right,
you're an epic paddler,
right.
right?
Yeah,
It's the wrong boat for most people. And the irony being is those people don't go to the Teleco. They paddle the Yokoi.
right. Yeah,
They're in the wrong gear, right? But what's in fashion right now? Half slices.
right.
Although that's going to die because the new creek boats, the new creek boats have evolved to paddle like a safer, easier half slice,
Hmm.
right? They've all got really small tails on them. You can pivot them around. They handle like a half slice without the oh shit that a half slice
Yeah,
has if you don't have the skill set, right? And so the 9 foot half slice is that's a dying thing, right?
yeah.
Now we're seeing him more like eight. We're seeing him at 8 foot. We're seeing him far more playful.
Hmm.
We're seeing the Hot Wheel. We're seeing the Scucks. We're seeing the new antics. I've got the Super Sandar. Those are the boats that were the Firecracker.
Yeah,
That 8 foot boat where it's a little bit better suited for more playful environments and less suited for really hard stuff. But it's because the creek boat is filling that niche. The
right.
modern creek boats.
Yeah,
Nobody
like the
does fat creek
skis
boats
and
anymore.
skis, the Indra,
Yeah, yeah. You got the Steez, the Indra. You got my Super Skip RR. You've got
the flow. I
the
think
reactor. Huh?
the flow from Jackson. I think is
Well, the
more
flow's
interesting.
more. It's the flow's shorter. It's a and it doesn't have a squishy tail.
Oh, okay.
Um, no more. Like the reactor. The from Jackson would be the clutch,
Yeah, clutch. Yeah, that's I
right?
got the two confused. Yeah,
Yeah. So those kinds of boats have done away with the point of a 9 foot half slice. There's no point
right.
in having a 9 foot half slice. Those boats are better at it, right? And
Mhm.
those the half slices did. So now the half slice is an 8 foot boat, right?
Yeah,
And it's got a little bit less rocker and a little bit less bow volume, maybe depending on the boat, and a little bit better hull. But most of them are still not great spinners. Like
hmm,
the Hot Wheel is a fun boat to paddle, but it wouldn't be that interesting in Hellhole. The Firecracker is a fun boat to paddle, but it wouldn't be that interesting in Hellhole.
right. So they're made to go down river
The new
and just kind of
antics,
play your way.
yeah, you're gonna splat and squirt, and then other than that, just paddle down,
Right.
right, through stuff.
Yeah.
But kayaking is a fashion sport.
Sure.
You never know it, but it's a fashion sport, and you look at who's doing what, and you've got the Dane Jacksons and those guys out there running these rivers, these class 5 rivers, doing all kinds of cool vertical stuff on the tail of the boat. And so, Joe Paddler walks into Festive Waters, and buys a half slice, and then they drive up to the Yokoi and they paddle in a straight line from the put into the takeout.
Right. Well, tell me about a time. So this segment is called Perfect Flow. Tell me about a time when and everything was just perfect for you on the river, like your most epic perfect day.
Wow. That's an impossible, um,
Okay, we can skip that one.
that's impossible. No, but because the reason why I say it's impossible is because my paddling career has been so varied that there's so many different days for different reasons that I come out of that day as a perfect day. I mean, as an example, in the spring of 1992, I made the Olympic team. I won the team trials by 22 seconds, which absolutely slaughtered
Right,
everybody on the course. I mean, you win slalom by a second. Right?
right.
I won by 22 seconds. They built the slalom course on a really hard class 4 rapid that was scary and hard, and it was my elements. And I had the perfect run, and I won first place on the team to go to the Olympic Games. That's a pretty perfect day,
Yeah,
right?
that would classify.
You know, but this summer I went creeking with my son, my 11-year-old, and we ran this pretty challenging creek for him. And he absolutely stomped everything. And the two of us were one-upping each other and trying to do these little slot moves and going down this river. And at the end of the day, man, that was a pretty perfect day.
Yeah,
And
I think
everything
he posted
between
that.
those
That
two,
was pretty cool to see.
right? And then there've been, dozens and dozens of other days with friends or with things that have happened that for whatever reason would be a perfect day and for completely different reasons.
Sure,
Um, and so there is no perfect day, but I can say that I've had a pretty perfect life
that's awesome.
as a
Yeah,
result of all these amazing days.
that's really cool
You know.
perspective. The next question is the current. What are you doing to stay in the flow today? And tell us about your new projects and congratulations on the 10-year anniversary of Soul.
Yeah, here's one that'll blow your mind. As influential and game changing as my time was at Riot,
Hmm.
the timing of when Riot happened, the massive leaps and bounds that design went through in that period, the way an entire industry changed in the way kayakers looked, in how we paddled, what we paddled, where we paddled, what our equipment was, on the philosophy of one boat does it all that you bought in 1982, and in 1987 you still had the same boat.
Hmm.
And you did everything in it, to changing out your boat every 6 months because there was a complete revolution in concepts every 6 months.
Right.
As game changing as that was, I was at Riot for 5 years.
Wow.
Soul has been 10.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And your boats look
Um,
really, really cool. I mean, a lot of, kind of the old concepts, but revitalized. And now you've got this new kids freestyle boat. Looks really cool.
Yeah. So Soul is a different company than any of the ones that I've done before, like Savage and Riot, and even when I was at Dagger, which I never owned Dagger, I worked for them. Um, I was always designing for me. What
Hmm.
do I want? Now, how do I flog this to the general public?
Yeah.
Right? I wanted a disco. That's
Hmm.
what I wanted. I wanted to go and do those things. Now, how do I sell this? Right?
Right.
And I never down tuned my boats. I never took the concept that I developed for me and then made it people friendly.
Right.
Something that Dagger is fairly outspoken that they do.
Right.
They will have a boat that they come up with, the prototype, and then they down tune it
Yep.
to sell it,
Yep.
right? And so your average customer doesn't get what the concept boat was, right?
Hmm.
Car manufacturers are notorious for that, right? You see the
Yeah.
the, the concept car
Yeah.
at the shows, like, I want that, and then they come out with it, and it looks like a fucking Rav4, you know. um, right? So I never did that. I made the
Yep.
boat for me. Now let's see how many I can sell.
Right.
Um, Whereas with Soul, I took a 10-year hiatus from paddling. I
Right.
went surfing. I went and competed in the Surfing World Cup in Hawaii and California, and I had two surf companies that I built up and sold. And I got into racing motorcycles, and I was riding for MV Augusta, racing motorcycles, and so I was doing all these other things, right? And when I came back into Soul, I wasn't the paddler anymore, and neither did I expect to be or want to be, that I was when I left Riot or when I was at Dragarosi. I was perhaps on a technical level more in tune with your average advanced paddler as opposed to
Hmm.
being at the level of your top paddlers, right?
Right.
And so what I wanted was now going to be much more in line with and in tune with
Mm-hmm.
what your average paddler can actually use,
Right.
right? Because my skill sets and my reaction time, and I'm older and my joints hurt and I'm a bit slower and I don't paddle as much and it takes me longer to recover.
Yep.
I don't know if you saw the video that I put on of the Scorpion, the wave that I did on the Scorpion, and it's been praised by some people as one of the most epic 90 seconds of surfing video in a kayak that they've ever seen, right? But I couldn't walk for 2 days afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all that torque and power of twisting this 8.5 foot boat around in the air
Mm-hmm.
with that kind of speed and power absolutely ruined my joints and muscles. Whereas when I was in my 20s, I'd have been out the same afternoon doing it again.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So, so I made the boat do it, but then I needed 2 days off to recover. Right. Afterwards.
Yep.
So it's much more in tune with what your average paddler is. And the other thing with Soul is, and it's kind of changed a little bit now, but originally one of the things that I would always do is like, what is everybody else doing? I'm not doing that.
Right.
I don't want to fight with them. I want to do something that nobody else is doing. So anybody who wants one of those, I'm the only game in town to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So when people were coming out with like this new slew of full slices, the home slice, the Nova, the mixed master, I did the 303. I did a 10-foot super fast wave surfing, eddy squirting, river running boat. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing on it on the market. It didn't compete with anything, right? And that's kind of where Soul was coming from. When all the creek boats were 8'8", 8'10", a lot of them were 9 feet. I did the Chaos Monkey, which was 9.5 feet. It was not a raceable boat. There was a limit. You couldn't race anything over 9 feet. And I said, I don't
Right.
give a shit what the rules are for racing. I could care less.
Right.
I want to have a boat that'll jump over everything.
Right.
Nothing can stop this boat, because you get this critical mass behind you and you just blow your way down everything.
Yeah.
And it did that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't competing with the 8-10 boats on the market, the Deltas and I think the Karma and, whatever the Machno, and that's what was on the market, at
Yeah.
the time, right? Is just a completely different boat. You could argue it's the same customer, somebody who's considering a Nova. I'm going to try and talk him into a 303. No, don't get that 7.5 foot slice boat. Get this 10-foot slice boat, right? So arguably the same customer, but with a product so radically different,
Right.
that, and, invariably you end up with, having similar things to other people, whether you like it or not. Like I came up with the Super Skip RR
Mm-hmm.
3 years before I ever put it on the market. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I don't think the market would accept this. Half slices were in and creek boats were fat. Boats like the Nirvana was selling, right? That's what people were
Mm-hmm.
buying, and the Code. And I didn't think people would buy a flat-tailed creek boat.
Right.
So I shelved it, right? And then when I saw the Stees did well, and then I saw maybe Piranha was working on the reactor, and it still had a bigger tail than what I had, but
Mm-hmm.
one or two boats that were starting to just pinch the tail a little bit,
Yeah.
just a little bit of pinch in the tail, and I was like, okay, now I'm doing it,
Right.
right? And I and came out with the RR, and then within 6 months there were several of them in the market, and now I'm competing against these other boats,
Right.
that are of a similar, and also the rocker style, that the idea of just skipping over everything, that's
Right.
not, the focus was on doing this with the bow, right? And I wanted to do this,
Mm-hmm.
right? I wanted to just slide over stuff, and the focus was on really like getting that bow up and then turning the boat.
Right.
So your Nirvana, Narvana, your Codes, all these boats were bow up
Yeah.
style paddling. and the Super Skip RR was bow down,
Mm.
highly rocket, but keep the boat flat,
Yeah.
which is what they all do now. So you invariably end up competing whether you like it or not. And then, of course, a massive focus on the kid stuff. And again, that's very selfish. If you look at the
Sure.
progression of the sizing of my boats, they follow the size of my son,
Sure. As it
right?
should be.
So when his skill set or his size dictates it's time for a new boat, that's when it comes out. People have been telling me, yeah, but you should have come out with a shenanigan years ago. But my son didn't need a shenanigan years ago.
Right.
He needed it now.
Right. That's
That's
cool.
why it's now, you know? So yeah, I could have done it years ago and sold it years ago, but what was the point? He wasn't really rolling in whitewater and he wasn't playing in waves. He liked creeking and he was running creeks. And that's why after I did the ride, the next boat was the Superfly,
Mm-hmm.
not a shenanigan, because he liked creeking and he wanted to go bomb creeks. And part of that is he didn't have a very good roll. And he just doesn't flip that much on a creek. He stays upright and he can bomb all
Right.
the stuff and never flip. Right. And so that's what he loved to do, right? And on a mountain bike, he likes to send shit. And on a snowboard, he likes to send shit. That's what he likes to do, right? So he wanted to go send waterfalls.
Yeah.
So that's why that boat happened and not the shenanigan,
That's cool.
So it's very, very selfish, right? But you have to tip your cap to EJ. Absolutely. When he came out with the Fun One in 2004, I think, for Dane,
Yeah.
like, it was a head scratcher. I'm like, who's gonna buy that?
Right.
Like, what? I just didn't see it. I didn't see it.
Mm.
And then after he did it and they sold, I was like,
Yeah.
okay. I guess the reason why parents don't teach their kids to paddle that young is because there's no gear.
Yeah.
Like, Dagger had the Dynamo and Piranha had the
Mm-hmm.
Rebel, both of which are not suitable for a 2, 3, 4-year-old. And so you've got this kid using a boat up to here.
Right.
No wonder they don't love kayaking.
Yeah.
It's like sticking your 2-year-old on a bicycle with 26-inch wheels. Like, of course, they
Right.
don't like it. You know,
Yeah.
like, what do you expect? Of course, they don't love it. You know, so for me, it was immediate. Like, once Kylie started climbing into my boats and showing interest in it and coming down to the river and asking to sit on my lap, and we would paddle through a rapid, kind of down the side of the rapid. And eventually I made a spray skirt that had a second tunnel, and I had a little pedestal. So I would get in the boat and I would put this pedestal in the boat, and then I would open the spray skirt and my wife would stick him in there, and then we would paddle down through the rapid. But by the time he was 3, I was like, okay, he's in my way.
Right. Too big.
I need to do a boat. I need to do a boat. And that's where the Terrible 2 came from, right? I wasn't trying to sell boats. I wanted one.
You own the company. You can
It
do
was
that.
the right boat for my son.
Yeah.
And I can do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, EJ's always done that, right? He did
Well,
the Fun
sure. Of
series. And
course.
if you look at, there's the Fun,
It's
and then there's the
progressive
Fun
maintenance.
1.5. Why is there Fun
Right.
1.5? Because Dana outgrew the Fun 1 and he was too small for the Fun 2. So he did the
Yeah.
1.5.
Right. Exactly.
Same.
So this next question is flow advice, and usually I ask people like what advice they would give to beginner or learner kayakers, but I think I'm going to ask you differently. What advice would you give to someone, because you brought it up and it hits me as well, someone who paddled in their 20s, early 30s, got out of it for life, job, kids, all the things, and now middle aged, they're getting back into paddling.
Um, okay, so I have a number of friends who dropped out of paddling for a decade or 2 decades almost, who've now got back into paddling.
Hmm.
I kind of dropped out of paddling for a decade and got back into paddling. So I went through it myself a little bit, and then I have close friends who are going through it now. And I think one of the key aspects is not to try and regain your glory days,
Mm,
but to enjoy paddling for what it is going to be for you now.
yeah,
Um, you're not going to be the paddler you once were, even
right.
if you were only an intermediate,
Hmm.
right? And I think there's a risk of being frustrated by not being able to do the things that you once could,
Mm,
you know? Um, I am not the paddler I once was, and I will never be as good ever again as I have already been.
yeah. Right.
That is a sobering fact that you have to come to grips with.
Hmm.
And I think if people getting into the sport can say, you know what, I want to get back into paddling. I want to reconnect with rivers.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to reconnect with air blunts
Right. Yeah.
and tricky woos. I want to reconnect with rivers. I want to reconnect with being out in nature. I want to reconnect with the camaraderie of being on a river with my friends and the small talk in the parking lot before the trip and the small talk in the eddies during the trip and the beers in the parking lot after the trip.
Yeah.
And I think if you come into it with that kind of positive attitude of it's not about the shit that I can do in my boat, it's about the experience that I'm going to have today with the people I'm going to be with.
Yeah. That's really great. This past weekend I was
Who,
on the Ocoee and paddled a half slice and surfed some waves, did a couple stern squirts, caught eddies, and paddled with people that I hadn't paddled with in 20 years, and it was one of the most beautiful days on the river ever.
right, exactly. And I think if you come into it that way, right? Um, if you have a 20-year-old boat in your garage, sell it. Like, don't start in that. And I don't
Yeah.
start in that for a number of reasons because you're probably not the size that you were when you had
Right.
that boat. You're certainly not the paddler that you were when you had that boat. And
Yep.
chances are that boat was a challenge when you were 20 years younger with double the skill set that you have now.
Hmm.
You're going to go out, you're going to have a couple of mediocre days that are going to be humbling and possibly frustrating. And it's not going to give you the experience that you want.
Right.
If you don't want to go buy a boat immediately, go rent one.
Right.
Get a modern boat. The modern boats are so much better from every company. Nobody makes a shit boat, which is not
Right.
was not the case 20 years ago. There were a lot of
Hmm.
really junk boats. People were trying so much stuff just for the sake of trying stuff. You had fins sticking out the sidewalls of boats and
Right.
bits of plastic bolted onto the decks, and it was nonsense for the sake of nonsense,
Right.
right? Nobody makes a terrible boat now. They're better boats and not as good boats, but they're all decent.
Yeah.
Go rent a boat from your local outfitter if you can find one, your local club. One of your friends has got something that you can use. It can be a half slice, it could be a modern playboat, it could be a whatever it is that floats your boat, and go have a couple of good days and try some different types of boats to find out what you like. Get in a 8 foot half slice. Get in a modern creeker. Get into a little ICF freestyle boat. Get into a modern full slice boat.
Hmm.
And after, a dozen days of paddling where you're starting to reconnect with some of your skill set and you're starting to figure things out and based on what it is to appeal or what appeals to you, like there's no point in going out and buying a clutch if you're not going to go run class 5 or hard
Right.
class 4.
Right.
Like if you're going to go to the Ocoee, like that's not the boat for you,
Sure.
right? Um, but that doesn't mean that you have to get into a Nova either
Right.
or a Mixmaster,
Right.
right? Maybe the right boat for you is a Hot Wheel. Maybe the right boat for you is a Trickster.
Right.
Maybe the right boat for you is an ICF boat, right?
Hmm.
Um, so you need to rediscover the new paddler that you're going to be based on the realities of who you are as a person, how often you get to paddle. You used to paddle 5 days a week. Now you're going to paddle 3 times a month,
Right.
maybe. So the learning curve is going to be way, way flatter. You don't recover as quick. You don't learn as quick, and the worst thing you can do is pull your old boat out of the garage and go, oh, I'm going to go run the Ocoee in my S6.
Right.
Man, you're going to have a miserable day,
I love it. That's great
you
advice
know.
for people looking to get back into it. Okay, so this next segment's kind of like a Mount Rushmore segment, and it's kind of we call it the rapids. So you're going to run the rapids with me. Some of these might be controversial. You can say pass, but basically I'm going to throw out a topic, and you're going to give me your top 3 to 5 from these different topics. I know this first one you might be a little biased on. So kayak designs ever.
So best kayak designs ever,
Best kayak designs ever. Top
or most
3 to 5,
influential.
or most, yeah, however you want to view it.
Exception Dancer,
Yep.
Jimmy Snyder Jet,
Yep.
maybe the Fury.
Okay. I like it. Best rivers ever.
Yeah. Lachines, so the St. Lawrence in Montreal.
Yep.
Lachines. Zambezi.
I knew it. Yep.
Wow. Maybe the Green.
Okay. Good.
Old Green. I don't
Country.
know. I've never run the new Green. I don't know
Yeah, I
about new
haven't been
Green.
on the new green yet either. Yeah. Looking forward to getting my skills back to check that out one day. Countries to paddle in.
Well, it depends on how you paddle and what you paddle. If you're a creeker versus if you're more of a sort of a playboater.
But this is Corin's list. Your favorite countries.
Yeah. So for me, where I would go, Canada,
Yep.
definitely. We've got so much water here. Um, okay, so Canada, the USA. It's tough because really there's four. So Canada, the USA, because it's so varied.
Yeah, you could have
Yes,
three
you've
to
got
five, and
everything.
four's fine.
Yeah, the Alps.
Okay.
So all of Europe, like all of the
Sure.
Alps,
Right.
right? So it's not a
Yeah.
country, but it's
Yeah. A
the
region.
Alps.
Yeah.
And then South Africa because
Hmm.
that's where I started paddling, and every time I go back and paddle there, it's this little gem in my heart.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
get that.
it's the rivers might not be as reliable and might not be quite as epic, but
Yeah.
it's where the
It
love
started for you.
started for me.
Yeah. That's the Nantahala for me.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Last question. This is the really difficult one.
mm.
So, being a father, there's things that you're going to do in life for the last time. And when you do those things in life for the last time, you probably don't know that you're doing it for the last time. For example, you changed a diaper for the last time. And when you did it, you didn't know it was going to be the last time changing a diaper. So the river gods have come down and they said,
Mm-hmm.
Corin, you've got one more day on the water. This is your last day ever in a kayak. What boat are you in? What river are you on? And who are you with?
I'm on the Grand Canyon
Love it.
with my son and my father,
Mm,
the person who taught me to paddle and the person who I taught to paddle.
love it. What boat are you in?
And I'm in a particle accelerator.
Beautiful. Love it. I made you think on a couple of these.
Yeah.
That was good. I could see the gears turning. So
Yeah. 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 I think, yeah, that would be it.
that sounds pretty epic. Corin, anything else that you would like to share?
Um, I think paddlers as a whole might be to varying degrees aware of the dire condition that the industry as a whole is in
Hmm.
currently. There are so few dealers, whitewater dealers. In 2000 there were 800 whitewater dealers in the United States. There are less than 100 now.
Wow.
Dealers in the United States. They're closing. They're closing every day. They can't make any money.
Hmm.
The cost of manufacturing a kayak is 3 times what it was in 2000,
Yeah.
and money is worth half as much. So a boat that was $1,000 in 2000, if it cost the same to make, should be $2,000 now. They're
Hmm.
not, and they cost 3 times to make.
Right.
So manufacturers are selling it to dealers at a loss, and dealers are selling it to the end customer at break even.
Mm.
There's almost no dealers. There's very few events anymore. If you consider the fact that in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were 3 whitewater festivals every single weekend somewhere in the United States happening concurrently.
Right.
Now there's a dozen a year total,
Right.
right? Um, and that's not telling people to go, hey, you have to take your hard-earned cash and go out and spend it on new gear. That's not what I'm saying. But I think there needs to be a general understanding in the marketplace when you walk into the dealer to buy your new Antix 3,
Right.
that you don't haggle this dealer down.
Mm.
He's not making money selling you this boat at $1,600, $1,700. He's barely covering his overhead and maybe skimming 10%.
Right.
And if you walk him down 10%, he didn't make a penny on that boat.
Mm. Hmm.
And that's why you have to drive 3 hours to go to see a dealer, or 5 hours to go to see a dealer, because the one that used to be an hour from you closed down.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to understand, like I said, everybody wants a deal and everybody wants to save money, and people's salaries are not in line with the cost of living. And these are all very real um, situations that your average person is in the marketplace. But I don't think people understand how close this industry is to having no whitewater dealers that you can go and sit in a boat,
Wow.
to manufacturers not making whitewater kayaks at all anymore because
Mm.
they can't make any money. It's a loss-making endeavor. Your Jacksons and your Daggers support their whitewater habits through their fishing boats or their
Right.
coolers or their other stuff,
Sure.
right? They're
Yeah.
basically paying for it with that other stuff, and they
Hmm.
can't make ends meet if it was just whitewater, right?
Right.
And understanding how close. I mean, Jackson almost went belly up. Liquid Logic almost went belly up. Dagger, who's owned by Pelican, almost went belly up. You
Right.
know, these are 3 staple brands of kayaks that almost disappeared last year
Right.
or the year before,
Hmm.
right? And think about that as a paddler when all of a sudden you have way less choice because your favorite brands and your backup brand are gone
Right.
because they can't make ends meet. And when you drive into the dealership in your $100,000 Audi with your $12,000 mountain bike on the roof and you start haggling over the price of the $1,600 boat, I want you to think about that.
Yeah.
Now, that's not everybody. A lot of
Sure.
people are rolling in their 2006 F10 pickup as well.
Right.
In a paddle jacket that's 2 decades old. There's lots and lots and lots of those guys too, right?
Yeah.
Or girls. But I had a retail store for a while, and you'd
Hmm.
have these guys roll up in their Audis with their bicycles on the roof, and they'd be haggling about the price.
Right.
And I remember just like looking at their car outside and looking at it and just being like, dude,
Yeah.
you know. And so it's just something that I want people to think about. I want people to think about the dire condition that our industry is in, which is not as bad as it was 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
It has improved.
Good.
But not by enough.
Do you think urban whitewater
And
parks will have any
so,
impact?
yeah, accessibility is accessibility. The more
Yeah,
accessible paddling is, then and it's easier to get families to go paddle if there's a
right.
whitewater park, because the family can drive down to the river and they're not having to deal with shuttles, and they can just do laps on the whitewater park. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
they don't have to be Charlotte either.
right.
It doesn't have to be that fancy. I mean, what's it called in South Carolina? Great Falls, that little park in South, that easy little whitewater park that's in, I think it's Great Falls, South Carolina, right? Um, that's a much smaller, perfectly adequate, little place to paddle.
Yeah,
So I think that, it's like, if you love kayaking and you're about to drop $10,000 on a mountain bike, maybe drop $8,000 on the mountain bike and go support kayaking.
right. I
You know,
agree.
because people assume it's going to be here forever, and that's an assumption.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really insightful. I appreciate you sharing that. And Corin, thanks for being on BFlow sessions, and thanks for everything you've done for the sport, and driving the sport and continue to do so. And I love watching the videos of you and your son out there playing on the water. So keep it up.
Cool thing. It was a pleasure being on the show, and I look forward to seeing it.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in to BFlow sessions. Thanks for listening to this episode of BFlow Sessions. Please take a moment and rate the show, give it a follow, and leave a comment. Also, if you could share it with your fans, your friends, your family, and everybody else you know in the paddling world, that would help the show grow and help more paddlers find and be in the flow.